Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on Child Outcome Summary or COS Process Training and Technical Assistance. My name is Amy Nicholas with the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center and the Center for IDEA Early Childhood Data Systems. And I'm talking with you today from chilly but very sunny North Carolina at the University of North Carolina, Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute. During today's webinar, please use the question and answer pod available to you at the bottom of your screen. You're going to have to hover over the bottom of your view and you'll see a Q&A button there. You'll also see an option for a chat pod. We're going to use that Q&A feature to send messages to the presenters in terms of questions to answer. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end to address those questions. They may come to us through that pod and we might answer them directly via text during the webinar or at the end with a verbal reply, just depending on the nature of the question. For today's webinar, I am happy to be joined by an amazing team of individuals who bring a wealth of knowledge with them about the COS process, including what it takes to effectively train local teams to implement the process. So with me today is Katrina Martin from the DAISY and ECTA Centers, Katie McCarthy with Vermont's Part B 619 program, Pam Miller from Maryland's Birth to 5 program, and live from Germany, representing the U.S. Department of Defense's Part C program, we have Naomi Youngren. With this webinar today, we hope to support your understanding of the National COS Training and Technical Assistance resources of all. So you will hear about the various sources, most, if not all, I can't think of one, developed in partnership with states and territories, and how programs are using them in different ways is another focus of our discussion today. You will see reference throughout the webinar to the ECTA Center's website. So I want to point out the specific location on the website where you can find information put out by the National Outcomes Measurement Technical Assistance Team. So that is at ectacenter.org/outcomes. If you haven't visited the site in a while, it may look a little different. We got a makeover a few months ago, and you can get to the outcomes section now right from the top navigation bar on the home page. And once you're in the outcomes section, you'll find separate subpages for child and family outcomes resources, and the COS process information also has its own section. And I'll share more about the COS section of the site in just a few minutes. We thought it might be helpful today to open the webinar with a brief summary of the latest national child outcomes data for programs that use the COS process. Each year, staff at the ECTA Center and DAISY Centers conduct an analysis of the national child outcomes data. We synthesize the results into a national summary report that includes information about data quality and trends in results. Staff hosted a webinar on the full national results back in October, and I'll show you where you can find information from that webinar. But for today's webinar, we extracted the information we have specific to those states that use the COS process. So I'm going to go through a few things related to that analysis now. We know there are differences in how states measure child outcomes. There are 3 main approaches used by Part C and 619, and then a few states have their own other approach. The majority of states for both Part C, so 75%, and for 619, 69%, use the COS process. Some states use one tool statewide, that's 14% for Part C, 17% for 619, and a few states use publishers' online systems. There are 3 or 5% for Part C and 2 or 3% for 619. Over the years, we've seen a few states make changes in their approaches. We saw a slight change this year in 2 states that moved from the COS process to one statewide tool. There are lots of considerations involved in changing approaches, as you know, and so it's important to keep in mind that no one approach is a perfect fit. We certainly welcome you to access TA from ECTA or DAISY if you would like assistance with thinking through the implications or anything else if you're considering changing approaches. So at a glance, These are the national child outcomes data for 2016-17 for Part C early intervention and Part B 619 preschool special education programs that use the COS process to collect child outcomes data. It's important to note that for these national estimates, we only include states that meet specific data quality criteria. So namely, they're not missing too much data. We eliminate states that are conducting sampling because we have no metric for estimating the extent of their missing data. We also only include states whose data show reasonable parameters for the federal reporting A to E progress category percentages. So let's start by taking a look at Part C. We can see the first column is summary statement 1, which is children who made greater than expected growth. So for Part C, we see that 68% in social relationships, outcome 1, 74% for outcome 2, knowledge and skills, 75% for outcome 3, taking action to meet needs. So in each category, roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of children made greater than expected growth. They changed their growth trajectories. If we look at the summary statement 1 data for preschool 619, that's in column 3 of this table, we can see that 83% or more of children made greater than expected growth in each of the 3 outcome areas. I'm going to move to some completeness data that we extracted too for COS states. So for the completeness data, it's a little bit different. We use all states, regardless of data quality characteristics. So the ends here are a little bit different than on the slide you saw previously. This bar chart is for Part C early intervention. And in the chart, each green bar represents a different COS state with the reported percentage of children included in their outcomes data for 2016-17. So on the low end, we're looking at one state reporting 5%. On the upper end, there's a state reporting 96%, and the national average that you can see there is 63%. But the thing that really stands out here is that there's a huge range or variation in states' data completeness. States are using a variety of strategies to address issues around missing data because we know that completeness of these data is a critical part of having the high quality information you need for decision making. Similarly, here's a bar chart showing the completeness data for COS states and DC for Part B preschool in 2016-17. And again, the completeness data ranges dramatically across states. On the low end, we have approximately 2%. On the high end, 68%. National average, 34%. Remember that 619 completeness data are calculated differently than Part C. They're based on child count. So we know that a lower percentage of children in the child count data can be expected to be included in the child outcomes data, which includes children who exited during the year and had at least 6 months of service. Here too, though, we see that data completeness is a data quality issue. And again, we know many states are working on this issue so they can have better information to then use that information in more meaningful ways. So if you want to find out more about the National Child Outcomes Analysis, you can find some key resources on the ECTA Center website. There you'll find a 2-page summary of the national results, as well as materials used for the full national data webinar in mid-October. And let's switch gears to another section of the website. So in an effort to improve the quality of the COS data, which we just talked about a little bit in looking at those national results, many states are working to improve the content and quality of the training and technical assistance they provide to local practitioners who engage in the COS process. So that is the real focus of today's webinar. We have a wealth of information available to you on COS process professional development on the ECTA Center website. It has been organized in a series of 4 sections. Before, it was found in different places on the website, but we took a lot of time in the past year to categorize the resources by purpose. And some of the resources used in professional development are to build foundational knowledge of the COS process, such as our COS process module, which you'll hear about today. Other resources, another section of these materials are around developing COS process skills, like age anchoring. That's a skill that's needed to engage in the process. We have other resources we've been developing and working on around assessing COS process competency. And then, of course, another category of consideration in any professional development program is continuous improvement. So there's information about continuing to refine and improve your program around COS process training and technical assistance. important resource in that section of the website is a new COS process professional development guidance document. So this guidance document is posted at the very top of that COS process PD page, and it is designed to explain how state and local TA providers can use the national resources to implement effective PD programs around the COS process. So it describes all of the PD resources that are available to you through the DAISY and ECTA centers. It gives a suggested progression through different training activities based on where your practitioners are showing areas of need. And it explains how you can support where to start planning for PD in a sequence based on the focus of your training priorities for your state. So that's a key resource that we encourage you to check out if you haven't already had a chance to. It was newly posted in this past spring, so you may not have seen it if you hadn't been to the website recently. Okay, I am going to pass it off to Katie McCarthy now, and Katie's going to talk about Vermont's use of some of the national resources as well as just their program around continuously improving their COS process. Katie?
Hi, thank you, Amy. Vermont's early childhood special ed is finding success utilizing the support and professional development tools on the child outcomes summary process. The next several slides document where we are going, where we are, and where we have been as we improve ECO practices and procedures throughout the state. Next slide. So,
1 second, Katie, sorry.
Sure, no, that's okay.
There we go.
Great, thank you. Here we see Vermont's COS timeline to data quality. This is going back to 2013. A major piece for us, back in 2013, the early childhood outcomes were embedded into our IEPs. Therefore, all early childhood special ed IEPs are written according to ECOs. So we used the next couple of years to really monitor the feedback and the data we were receiving to interpret the field's response to this change. And the data that we collected showed us that the field, the early childhood special ed field, was really struggling with this. And at the same time, we also had universal pre-kindergarten in Vermont, and that includes 10 hours of free pre-K education for every child. And that was beginning, so that kind of complicated things a little bit more as far as needing more professional development. And we really recognized that need for technical assistance and learning. In 2015, we luckily joined the DAISY ECTA cohort and distributed the Early Childhood Special Ed Process Survey that really helped us assess the IEP early childhood outcome process to investigate what our needs were as a state as far as professional development. And we weren't surprised by the results that really signaled the technical assistance and the professional development that we needed around early childhood outcomes. This led to our work in 2016, which we, with ECTA and DAISY's guidance, we developed the Vermont Early Childhood Outcomes Practice and Procedures Manual, which is intended for use by professionals who are responsible for collecting, reviewing, understanding, and/or reporting ECOs for children receiving early childhood special ed services within Vermont. It's aligned with our early learning standards and references and encourages use of several ECTA resources, such as the decision tree and the COS team collaboration, or COS-TC. Professional development continued through 2017, and that culminated with our December data days. And I'll reference 2018 and 2019 at the end of my slides here and let you know what's going on with us too. But next slide, please. So December data days was a day-long institute that was repeated in 5 different regions of Vermont. We were so lucky to have our ECTA and DAISY colleagues come and join us. We called it our tour, and it's probably the closest to living like a rock star on the road I'll ever have. We visited 5 different regions, actually 4. We were snowed out of 1, so 1 did not happen, unfortunately. But the outcomes listed here gain knowledge about how statewide early childhood outcomes data are collected and reported, learn about critical questions that can drive early childhood outcomes data analysis and use, and be better able to use early childhood outcomes data to sustain improved data quality and decision-making at the local level. That was to get our major intent to improve early childhood outcomes and data knowledge, and also that confidence of early childhood special ed teams in order to improve data quality. Next slide, please. On this slide, this is a list of our sessions that we offered during the day-long institutes. We were lucky, again, like I said, that DAISY and ECTA could join us. The sessions listed on the left were really pinpointed on what we felt our needs were as a state. And we really encouraged teams to come together, and we also provided them time to talk and explore materials. We found that some materials that DAISY and ECTA provided were more readily used, like the decision tree, and there were others that they were less familiar with. The dialogue and feedback that we received during these December data days were helpful in us determining what our professional learning and support would look like moving into 2018 and beyond. And a key national resource, on the next slide, the COS online modules are a big piece of our PD moving forward, which I'll talk about in a minute. Next slide. So we have a poll on the COS online modules, which will pop up. How familiar are you with the national COS online module developed by ECTA and DAISY? And if you can answer that question. Okay, great. So it looks like most people are somewhat familiar, we have about, doing math in my head, and I'm a reading person, 79% are at least somewhat familiar, very familiar, or very familiar and use it. So fantastic. So in an effort to provide consistency in the training that practitioners receive on the COS process, the DAISY and ECTA centers developed an online learning module. Over the course of multiple sessions, participants learn about the practices that contribute to consistent and meaningful COS decision-making, such as how to consider children's functioning in relation to age-expected development, and how to apply the criteria of each of the ratings on the 7-point scale. Vermont is a state with a very small agency of education, and we're mostly rural. Our capacity to provide technical assistance and trainings in person is extremely limited. So we really see the COS online modules here as a way to provide consistent, high-quality professional learning, and it complements our early childhood outcomes practices and procedures manual. The COS modules can be used at the local district and supervisory union level for new special educators, while sessions like teaming would be instrumental to helping teams work together to make decisions. And that's really an area, the teaming piece is really an area in Vermont that we've kind of pinpointed as what needs a lot of improvement too. Next slide, please. So this slide designates where we are going moving forward with our continuous improvement in 2018 and beyond. Can't believe it's almost December. So first, we're working with local teams to expand data knowledge and ensure that high quality data. We received a lot of information, a wealth of information from our data days. And this has kind of facilitated some conversations with my Part C counterpart. So we're talking about, okay, how can we post these online and incorporate the COS modules into online PD? Like I said, Vermont's a small rural state. We want to make sure that this information is consistently being used. It does partner nice with our early childhood, our early practices and procedures manual, and we want to continue that high quality data. In October, at our early childhood special ed yearly meeting, I hosted a session on the COS modules and how team members can utilize them, and it was very well received. And in the early part of 2019, we, like I said, hope to link them to our website. And accompanying the link will be the ECTA guidance document that Amy just shared, and also a smaller piece of document that just kind of explains and bridges any difference in language, and what our guidance is Vermont is, you know, to go through that too. So we're kind of, I like to use the term Vermontizing here, just so that it gives it that Vermont look, and then people are knowing that it's also coming from us. In 2019, we will hopefully be repeating the early childhood special ed self-assessment that was originally given in 2015, and that's going to assess how our professional development is affecting or has affected the early childhood outcome knowledge. Of course, our data, we're hopefully, it is affecting our data as well, and we'll be getting that back in a couple months too. We're in the process of also, as a state, establishing a state longitudinal data system. And so, you know, data quality has never been more important here. We're working with our data team, especially our new special ed data manager. She's been here for about a year, and she's fantastic. And she's really helping us to investigate our data, to make sure we are receiving that high quality information and data that our programs receive, and that the local data that they're also receiving data at the local level to help make that continuous programmatic improvement that we want to see. So I am going to transition over to Naomi Youngren, who is the CSPD Part C coordinator for the DoD, and she will now take you on a COS professional development journey.
Hey, thanks a bunch, Katie. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the key resources from ECTA and DAISY that our programs have found particularly useful as we continue to enhance and sustain our COS quality practices. Next slide, please, Amy. So in the beginning, probably not like others' efforts, we had a really slow start. We spent a lot of time navigating the resources that were out there, that were being built, spent a lot of time learning from others, probably many of you also that are on the call today. We spent quite a good time tweaking our process for measuring child and family outcomes fairly extensively over the years. And perhaps not surprising, we continue to tweak and hopefully advance our practices. It was early on, similar to what Katie had said, we really recognized that as we started to measure child outcomes particularly, we had a good, really probably bad, amount of missing data. We figured out that fairly quickly that it was probably because the COS process was really entirely separate from the IFSP process. It was nearly an isolated process. And truly, providers expressed that it really felt like it was that one more thing to do, and of course, nobody wants just one more thing to do. And our data certainly showed that as well. So really needing to overhaul how we were doing the COS process early on was very important. Next slide, please, Amy. So we did a good amount of face-to-face training and webinar training. We spent time reviewing articles, examining the data that were out there, reviewing what I like to call COS studies, developing COS studies, as well as spending time observing and videotaping providers working through the COS process. We really recognized that it was so important to have some ongoing training in our program. While the DoD Part C programs are relatively small, we're spread across the globe, and there's quite a bit of carryover, or excuse me, vacancies. So it was so important to have ongoing training, as it is today as well. One thing we, and of course many others did, was integrate the COS process into our IFSP. And I just wanted to show you a little glimpse of our latest iteration of the IFSP. As I mentioned, it's been revised and changed several times over the years, in part from learning from the great work of so many others that are out there also trying to integrate. This latest version that's shown here on the slide shows how the COS is embedded into the present levels of development. So the present levels of development are organized by the 3 outcomes. The left-hand bar there, I don't know if you can see it clearly on the slide, it just provides some prompts or some questions about the various different outcomes. This particular page here shows outcome number 1, and there are some question prompts there on the left that providers have really found to be helpful for ensuring that the breadth and the depth of the outcome area is covered. And then at the bottom, what you see is the scale there that is actually now, I'm pretty excited about this, that is now actually completed directly with the family. So the family is sitting at the table for generating the rating process. One of the exciting things, of course, was that by integrating COS into the IFSP, we saw marked improvements in data completeness, and we're really up at the 90% plus with regards to data completeness. So pretty excited about that. The URL that's shown here on the slide will bring you to our IFSP if anybody is interested in taking a closer peek at that. But really, it's been, you know, just as we think we've got something settled, then we learn more, or we further analyze what it is that we've got in place, and there's always room for growth and improvement, and certainly continued professional development. Next slide, please, Amy. I'm going to talk a little bit about some key resources that we found particularly instrumental in our ongoing process of enhancing our COS practices. This one starts off with a poll. Amy, do you want to go ahead and post the poll? There it is. And this is particularly with regards to the integration process. We're curious if your programs, your systems are integrating COS into your IFSP or IEP processes. Oh, wow, a good very many of you are. 69, 70% are. Some of you are exploring it, and not many at all. One out there is not yet exploring it, or for other reasons. So thanks. So the next, this key resource that you see on the slide now about integrating outcomes, the interactive guide, perhaps you're familiar with this. This and the IFSP, or there's also one for IEP, outcomes flowchart, we have found particularly helpful in the integration process. And I will say, when the interactive guide for integrating came out, we were already well into the process. This interactive guide contains 4 stages of implementation as described by implementation science literature. As well, it includes a lot of really concrete steps within each one of the stages where you can take a deeper look at the process and even develop a plan to ensure that comprehensive, efficient, integrated process. what I found interesting, as I mentioned, we'd already started integrating, but even going back retrospectively and looking at this interactive guide, we found some pieces that we could use to even further enhance, or some pieces that we maybe didn't consider quite as effectively as we could have. So even if you're well into the integration process, even revisiting this might provide some additional insight. At least that's what we certainly found in our programs. And then on the right-hand side of this slide is the flow chart. Again, this has just been instrumental. This was a part of a work group that came together to think about all the different ways that outcomes can be embedded, not just into the entire IFSP, or there's a similar one to this for IEPs as well, that process. This, in fact, is used for ongoing training in our programs, just to really reinforce how outcomes is an integral part of the entire process, not just something that is completed at the end. So even looking at this and holding some brainstorming discussions about how else can we integrate, or how else do we think about outcomes throughout the IFSP process, has certainly been helpful. Next slide, please, Amy. I'm going to talk a little bit about the COS-TC, or the Child Outcome Summary Team Collaboration Quality Practices. Let's run the poll and see where folks are at with this one too. So how familiar are you with the COS-TC package? Okay, a little bit of, this one's relatively new. This hasn't been out for very long, not as long as the other one. So I'm not totally surprised that there are several that are not quite familiar. Some are somewhat familiar. It's almost kind of a flip of what the other one was. Great, thanks for sharing that. So this, the Child Outcome Summary Team Collaboration Quality Practices was designed really to assist states and programs with improving the COS team collaboration practices. It's built around a checklist of quality practices, really to provide that mechanism for people that are doing the COS with families, that are supervising, that are training on COS practices, to identify and observe and even assess and self-reflect on the demonstration of the quality practices that are included. And the quality practices that are included in the COS-TC, many of those emerged from the enhanced study that was done. And while it certainly underscores ways to actively engage families as critical team members in the COS process, a lot of the content is applicable to all COS teams, regardless of how it is that, regardless of who's involved and how that's done. Next slide, I just want to show you a little glimpse at some of the resources that are including. This is just a snapshot of some of the resources. In the upper left, what you'll see is just a little bit of an excerpt from the actual checklist. So there's a checklist of practices that can be used as a self-assessment. They can be used for observing and providing feedback in feedback sessions, or even for a assessment process or verification. The other thing that we did was, for each one of those items that's in the checklist, that next illustration there on the bottom left shows that for each item in the checklist, there is a description of what it is, and then there's a bit more key information about it. And then we included two scenarios. One is Norton, one is Emmanuel. And the Norton example is more representative of a program that doesn't have a whole lot of interaction with the family prior to the COS rating. So when they come to that COS meeting, there's more information that has to be gathered. Whereas the Emmanuel example has a program whereby their practice has more interaction, more context with the family. So when you come to that COS meeting, there's not as much information that's gathered because that was gathered at an earlier point. The other thing that is included is interactive COS online practice. And here on the right-hand side, it just shows you a little bit of a picture of that. And exciting sort of is that there are some videos. You know, it's never fun to see yourself on video, but boy, videos can be really powerful. for learning, for the process of really deciphering how quality practices are implemented, as well as to identify those missed opportunities and what can be done to further enhance practices when we see missed opportunities. I will say in our program, we're also working to use the COS-CC as part of a certification process, whereby providers have to be observed or videotape a COS meeting, and then we review it using the COS-TC for that process. This next slide, Amy, if you want to scoot ahead to the next slide, this is just going to show you where you can find the COS-TC. There's a lot of resources that are included with it. I just highlighted a few of them. But if you go here to the ECTA website, and the URL is included here on the bottom, what you'll find is a tab specifically about the COS-TC and all of the associated resources. And then you'll see the link also for the online practice. And shown here on the right side of this slide is just a visual illustration of what the online practice looks like and how you can work through the COS-TC checklist and the quality practices, which are organized around 5 different sections. And you can go through each section and review the checklist items, learn a little bit more about them, why they're important, what they look like, and then actually observe a video, and you can rate the video and then get feedback on the video as well. So certainly a robust training project actually, and certainly a resource that we're finding very useful in our program, and I understand with some other programs are experiencing some similar success with that. So that's kind of exciting. Okay, moving on, I want to share just one more resource. This one also is relatively new. If you don't mind scooting ahead to the next slide, Amy, and putting up a poll. This resource was recently completed, and this is about age anchoring guidance. So let's see your familiarity with this one. Okay, again, it's interesting. This one hasn't been out there very long, so I'm not surprised that some folks aren't familiar. So I think this is one of those things that once you dig into it, and it's not that lengthy. I'm going to show you a picture of what it looks like here. I think you'll find it to be quite useful. Amy, why don't you go ahead and flip to the next slide where it shows the table of contents. So here on this slide, you'll see the table of contents for the age anchoring guidance. What it is it's organized around some common questions about age anchoring. And then for each one of those questions, so for example, here we just highlighted question number 12, you'll go to that page and it describes the answer to the question. So here the question is, what if an age anchoring tool does not address the skills that the team is trying to anchor? It provides an answer to that question. And then for each one of the questions, there's an applied practice. So you can work through the applied practice. I will tell you how we've been using this in some of our programs is taking a question at a time and really just using it as part of ongoing professional development. So some of our programs will use it at a staff meeting where they're working through the different questions that are included in the age anchoring guidance, really to try to facilitate some standardization and some common practice and understanding, and certainly addressing some of those sticky wickets, if you will, with regards to age anchoring. So I think this particular resource is quite helpful. It's one of those things that it's just a document. Anybody can pick it up and look through it. It's available, of course, at the ECTA website as well. All right, next slide. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things that we're looking forward to in our programs as we continue to enhance our quality practices and moving forward with that. Certainly what we're looking at is next steps include some solidifying of the certification process. We have, like I said, programs all over the globe and really trying to ensure that there's common understanding and common implementation of practices. So not only do our our families or our providers move across our programs, but so too do our families. So we want them to have consistent experiences. The other thing is really trying to put an emphasis on the linkage of child and family outcomes. What we're finding is that it just seems that family outcomes are kind of on the sideline, perhaps because they're not as difficult, they're not as complicated to measure, but we certainly think that they are as equally as important as the child outcomes. So really trying to put a greater linkage between those and a higher emphasis on that. And then the other is mentoring and coaching and building some training hubs so providers can actually go and see quality practices in action and visit some other colleagues that are also working through the COS process and building our quality that way. So lots of exciting things. It was exciting to hear from Katie as well. They've got some great stuff going on. And now I'm thrilled to introduce, to turn this over to my colleague and friend, Pam Miller from Maryland.
Good afternoon, everyone, and greetings from Maryland. We are very excited to share our birth to kindergarten COS process PD journey. And it's quite ironic to follow Naomi because she's been a huge influence every step of the way in our professional development process. And I'd also like to acknowledge the support and technical assistance we've received and continue to receive from ECTA and from DAISY, as well as our partners from the Johns Hopkins University Center for Technology and Education who have assisted us with our web-based materials. Next slide. So with technical assistance from ECTA, Maryland began using the COS process to measure child outcomes in early intervention in 2011. And then very quickly, the next year, we integrated the COS process into the IFSP. And you heard actually from both of Naomi and Katie some of the reasons why it was the same in Maryland. Missing data, it was a separate, process. It just wasn't really, didn't make sense to folks. So then in 2016, just 3 years ago, we began making the same shifts in preschool, moving from using one statewide tool to actually using the COS process integrated into the IEP for children ages 3 to kindergarten. This illustration just shows this integrated process and really shows how it supports family engagement, functionality, and age-expected development. And in January of 2016, we issued a Child Outcome Summary Technical Assistance Bulletin, Birth to Kindergarten, to provide very clear guidance around the COS process integrated in both the IFSP and the IEP. And this TA bulletin has been hyperlinked in the PowerPoint, and this will be loaded to the ECTA website after the webinar. Next slide. Around the same time that around 2016-17, we became very focused on Fidelity through our Part C State Systemic Improvement Plan work and with discussions that we were having with our state implementation team, which included local leaders. We gained a thorough understanding of COS implementation practices by conducting landscape interviews throughout the state and identified strengths, gaps, training, and technical support needs as programs were implementing the COS process very inconsistently. And we know that it is critical to our work towards statewide fidelity of our COS rating process because, we use this data for programmatic decision making. And at the same time, the enhanced studies completed by ECTA supported our work by showing that the COS process can be valid and reliable if completed as intended with fidelity. So we developed what we called our COS core components rationale and moved forward with our framework for birth to kindergarten COS training and support around Maryland's core components of the COS process. If these 4 components are not in place, then the COS process is really not being implemented with fidelity. So these 4 components are functional child and family assessment, true authentic assessment, the age anchoring process and tools, the completion of the COS rating prep tool to identify age expected, immediate foundational and foundational skills and behaviors, and finally, the use of the decision tree for every COS rating. So at this point, I'd like Amy to go ahead and launch another poll about participants' use of the decision tree. So do you require using the decision tree as part of the COS rating process? Okay, so let's see. We have the largest number, 71%, saying sometimes, but it's really up to local program staff whether they're using it. We have almost a quarter saying yes, they're using it and requiring it to determine COS ratings. And then we have a person who really doesn't know about it and several saying that it is not required. So this is an area where we really found it was very critical to have consistency in practice. All right, Amy, next slide. So using all of this work around Fidelity, we created the Maryland Birth to Kindergarten Child Outcomes Gateway. And this is a completely open, accessible site that you are welcome to explore further. I'm just going to spend a couple minutes kind of taking you through some of what is on the site. It really begins with the overarching goals of early intervention and preschool special education for children and families, and clearly describes the child and family outcomes as the framework for our work. Under the Foundations tab, we show a side-by-side of the mission and key principles for early intervention that's aligned with the goal and key principles underlining the IEP process, along with links to the DEC recommended practices and the mission and key principles of Part C online curricula. So lots of resources there that are really foundational to the process. And then under COS training support is housed our training plan with a printable guide to birth to kindergarten child outcomes and COS process training and support, which includes as the first requirement the completion of the national ECTA DAISY modules that were highlighted earlier. There's actually a link to these modules right on the website under the training plan. This tab also includes all of our COS face-to-face training materials, our COS Fidelity and refresher training, which we use the COS-TC that you heard Naomi talk about for that refresher training, and then the Maryland COS Competency Check, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then the last two tabs are the COS Process Support tab, focusing on core components and strengthening our practices, and finally the Program Improvement Support tab, providing guidance around data-informed decision-making, COS data resources, and program improvement resources. Okay, Amy, next slide. So before I talk just a bit about Maryland's COS Competency Check, I did want to highlight this national resource, the Child Outcomes Step-by-Step video. We have been using this resource for quite a while. This video is included as part of the DAISY ECTA training modules, and we actually have a link to the video on our Gateway website as part of our COS training materials. Additionally, we continue to promote this resource with our early intervention providers and our state and local family support coordinators because it is an excellent resource to share with families. Next slide, please. So I wanted to finish up Maryland's part of the presentation by sharing just a little bit about the Maryland COS Competency Check. As part of Maryland's COS training process, all personnel are being required to complete and pass the Maryland COS Competency Check, which includes in Section A, a knowledge check, and in Section B, a case study that actually originally Naomi developed this for us. It includes a video, it includes the evaluation and assessment summary, it includes the functional assessment summary. Each trainee has to age anchor the functional skills and complete the COS rating prep tool. And then they go to part C of this, assess this check, and they select a rating for each early childhood outcome using both the COS rating prep tool and the COS decision tree. So in order to be considered as passing the Maryland COS Competency Check, trainees must answer 12 out of 15 knowledge check questions correctly and be within one number up or down on the 1 to 7 COS ratings for each of the 3 early childhood outcomes. As I said earlier, we know that it is critical for all early intervention and preschool special education providers to implement the COS process with Fidelity, and this is certainly one step to ensuring COS competency. I'm now going to turn this over to Katrina from ECTA and Daisy for us to hear more about the National COS Competency Check.
Thanks, Pam. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the national version of the COS Competency Check. The National Child Outcomes Summary Competency Check is still underway. It's under development. This tool will be used or be able to be used to assess practitioners' knowledge and skills on the COS process. Currently, and similar to what we saw in Maryland, there are 2 levels of the competency check. Level 1 is multiple choice and is designed to test practitioners' basic knowledge of the COS process. And then we have a level 2 that includes a case study and measures practitioners' ability to apply their knowledge and skills to determine COS ratings for a practice child. Level 2, also similar to the Maryland version, does have a video to enhance the case study. Okay, Amy, next slide. Here you can see our results for our field test, which was completed in October of this year. Overall, we are very happy with how level 1 of the competency check performed. You can see that we had a 90% pass rate for both birth to 3 and 3 to 5 practitioners. However, we continue to have concerns regarding our overall pass rate for level 2. So currently Daisy and ECTA are in discussions about the next steps in the development of this assessment. So stay tuned to find out what happens next with the National COS Competency Check. Okay, so next we'd like to hear just a little bit from you about your training priorities. So Amy, if you could pull up our poll, thank you. So if you can select one of these options, thinking about your highest priority in terms of your COS training needs. Does it have to do with understanding the functionality of skills, age anchoring, applying the 7-point criteria, engaging families, or other? And if you do choose other, we ask that you please provide a little bit more detail in the chat box. Okay, it looks like we have a pretty good mix here in terms of what people consider their program's top priority training need for the COS. We have a few people that would like to continue thinking about skills in relation to their functionality. A quarter of our participants would like to continue looking at age anchoring skills, so that age anchoring guidance document that we saw earlier is going to be really helpful for that. 9 people, almost 40%, thinking about applying the criteria of the 7-point rating scale, and a quarter on engaging families. All right, thanks. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So we hope that this webinar has provided you with some basic information about COS professional development and training. If you'd like to keep discussing this topic, we'd like to invite you to join our COS Learning community, which meets quarterly. Our next call is on Tuesday, December 18th. And if you'd like to hear more about this community or join, we ask that you please contact Amy. Her contact information is at the bottom of this slide. And we'll move on to the next slide. We'll be posting a recording of this webinar on the ECTA events page on our website. And also, please keep in mind that you'll be receiving an evaluation for this webinar. We ask you to take the time to fill that out and help us identify what worked well for you today and what we might do differently next time to meet your needs. As always, you can find more information about the work that we do at DAISY and ECTA on our websites. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Please feel free to reach out to any of us on this presentation team if you have any additional questions. Thanks so much, everyone.